Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Leading Change. My name is Emma, and I've got Meg with me today. And we're going to be talking about really forging your own way within the corporate world. But before I get to all the questions that I've got for you, can you give everybody an introduction?
I can, but first I have to say thank you for having me. It feels like this has been a long time coming, and I'm excited to have this conversation with you. For those who don't know who I am, I'm Meg McKeen. This is my 25th year in the insurance industry, and 7 years ago, a really profound experience with burnout sent me from my own corporate path to self-employment. And that's what I do today as a consultant through the firm I started, Adjunct Advisors. And I help insurance organizations and individuals who have chosen a career here to really refine and recenter their human experience that we're having at work.
Well, I'm really excited to have you here. So no thank yous needed. Like you said, it's been a while coming. And I had a moment where I was like, how haven't we gotten this taken care of yet? So I'm glad to have you here. So I want to kind of back up a little bit and start with the why before we dive into this idea of how we chart that path forward. So from working with your community and all of the work that you do, what are you hearing tied to this idea of corporate burnout and really like what the cause behind it all is?
Yeah, it's fascinating. You know, one of the things that I chose to do, and it was both strategic and necessary, was to start speaking my truth through the first person in my experience with burnout. And what has happened is it has welcomed a much larger conversation about the experiences that each of us are having individually. And there are some people who don't understand what burnout is and are so far from it that they really can't relate. And then there are those that are teetering on the edge of it, and those that are deeply in it, and they're at a breaking point of sorts. And so we're all coming to this discussion from a slightly different place, and I want to honor that. But over and over again, the conversations that I have, whether it's with women, and I don't work exclusively with women, but that tends to be those who are drawn to me based on this first person narrative that I use, is this sense of a sense of confusion, or almost a juxtaposition of, I'm happy in my life. I make a decent amount of money. I've been promoted. I've been supported. I'm seen and respected and empowered in the workplace. And yet something is still missing for me. And then you marry for that a lot of us, and I'm 46, I still have many years ahead of me to work, but I've got a lot of experience under my belt as well. Many of us are questioning, is this all that there is for me? And there's this interesting thing happening where we're grateful for it, but we're also slightly resentful of it. And we're satisfied, and yet we're wanting more. And we're realizing that the industry isn't necessarily going to tap us on the shoulder and say, here's the next opportunity for you. Let me lay out the path with clarity. It's, we're going to need to sit in that driver's seat and start to make some of the decisions, and frankly, the hard choices and the hard realignment of our values and our goals in order to make the next move more clear.
I think you're spot on with this idea that sometimes we expect for somebody to come forward with a solution when really that responsibility kind of lies. It's a hard truth, but that responsibility lies with us. And opportunities will come, but you have to have your eyes open for what those opportunities are and be willing to make maybe some of the hard choices or the big moves to take advantage of those opportunities, which isn't always the easiest thing to do.
Yeah, it's so hard. It's so hard to do that, the deep internal work and building the muscle of your self-trust that you at the end of the day know what's right for you, and you know the order in which your values live on your own internal compass. And I think a lot of us have been, whether it's even intentional or we are aware of it, but we've allowed others to drive the train for us. And so many of us are coming into this, maybe it's an awakening, maybe I do think it's post-pandemic life where a lot of us have reset and level set where work fits into our life. But maybe the things that we prioritized when we were in our 20s or early 30s are different now that we're at a different, and I don't want to make this about age, but I know the more I talk about being a woman at 46, having these feelings, more and more women come out of the woodwork and say, yeah, me too. So there is something to the evolution that we're doing as women, but also as professionals. It's happening simultaneously.
So where I want to go next is kind of this idea of, so we've reached this point where maybe we recognize that there needs to be a rebalancing or a restructuring of the role that work plays in our lives. And we'll get to like how to shape your own adventure, like both of us have started. But there's a lot of people that entrepreneurship or having their own business isn't something that they even want to venture towards. They don't want to think about it. They want a job, but they want to reshape how they move about the corporate world. What advice do you give for kind of like charting your own path in that environment?
Yeah, I want to acknowledge exactly what you said. I can't say I recommend self-employment. Like it has worked out, but in many cases it doesn't. And I think a lot of people come to it with some misguided expectations about what that can look like. And I know we're going to get into that, but I want to acknowledge I made some turns before this one because I was seeking something. I was looking for a better cultural fit. I was looking for advancement in terms of my skills and the opportunities. And I really struggled to find that place. And it wasn't necessarily the fault of the organizations that I was working for. It's that I didn't really know what I was looking for. And so I think there's something really lovely about sitting with yourself and really identifying, where do you get your energy from? Do an audit of your day. When in the day do you thrive? Are you a 9 to 5 top performer? I was not. I work now in sprints, and that works really well for me and my nervous system. Anybody who knows me knows I'm very open about challenges navigating anxiety. And one of the things that I learned is that a 40, 50, 60-hour work week does not work well for my nervous system. And so I think sitting in the curiosity and really letting your mind wander. And for those of us that are very like type A and analytical, and I identify that way, this can feel like a total waste of time. Like journaling. If you're not a journaler, this can feel like a very uncomfortable exercise, but I would encourage you to sit with that, neutralize your environment, go to a coffee shop, turn your phone off, and really let your mind go to a place that may seem so outlandish and so out there, and then back into it. Because the truth is, many of us have reached a point in our careers where our next opportunity is not going to come from cold applying to a job on LinkedIn. It's going to come through our network. And there are organizations who have a need for the skills that we bring to the table, not necessarily the job that we do. And I think that's where we get a little lost in our business. We've been an underwriter, so therefore we are an underwriter. You've been a producer, therefore you are a producer. And the skills are transferable. It's the way we tell that story. And so I think really identifying where can the skill set that you have be plugged into a new organization, and then asking yourself about those priorities that you've set for yourself. Can I find that cultural fit? Is the work-life balance, makes me want to throw up when I say it because we all know it's not possible, but is there an appreciation and a respect for the fact that I am, in addition to a really valuable employee, I'm also really valuable at home to my family and to my community. And so it really starts with a sense of curiosity and trusting yourself enough to be able to create the space to start daydreaming about what might be next. And that would be, I'm very thoughtful about the advice giving because frankly, I took a lot of advice when I was a young woman in the industry, and it wasn't good advice. It wasn't the right advice for me. It just came from people who happened to be at this longer than I had been, but not people that valued what I did about my relationship with work. And so I'd be really, really thoughtful about the inputs that you have and whose opinions you're listening to and whose brains you're trying to pick when you're thinking about this. Because at the end of the day, and this is maybe one of the hardest and most woo things that I'll say, only you know what's right for you. And you also know what's not right for you. And if you're sitting in that place of, I know this isn't it, then maybe it's time to do some of that exploration.
So I don't think that that's a woo thing. I think that's just like a true statement.
Yeah, but for some, I get talking about my feelings and people are like, oh, there she goes again.
We could go down a whole other path of how Ema is a little bit of woo-woo, but I think you made a couple of points there that I like completely agree with, and actually had a conversation with one of the women that I mentor through a women in technology program. And she's applying for internships. So very early in her career, and she's had one internship, and she's got a background in IT and infrastructure, and her last internship was in infrastructure, and she could tell that that wasn't right. Yeah. But she didn't know how to pivot and how to apply those skills to other places. And we were talking through writing cover letters and what that looks like. And I had her take a step back, and I was like, think about your skills, not where you fit before, not what your major is, but think about like what you actually enjoy doing and what those skills are and how they'll apply to that job. And she said that since she started making that shift, all of a sudden she's gotten a number of callbacks for interviews that she didn't get previously. And so she was like really excited for that. And once you've started doing that, it seems so obvious. But there's so much of us trying to fit ourselves into boxes all the time that we lose sight of like the value that just like some of our innate personality traits might bring to the table for people.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a individual problem, but that's also an industry problem. We definitely are looking for butts to put in seats in many cases. And so amazing that gal has the opportunity to be mentored by you and to get that advice at this point in her career, because I think some of us, it's taken a lot longer to learn how to do that sort of self-advocacy. But one of the exercises that I like to do with individuals when we're working one-on-one and having conversations a lot like this, frankly, is sometimes we are so close to seeing what those individual characteristics are that we either take them for granted or we just can't see. And this is a time when we can engage the people around us for some feedback. And so a really cool exercise is to ask a colleague, ask your boss, ask a parent if you're fortunate to have them, or one, a partner, a spouse, your kids, what 5 words would you use to describe me? Because you don't have 16 different versions. There's some similarity and commonality across the board. And guess what? Those are the same skills that you can be leveraging at work, and you probably already are, but you don't have the right packaging for them yet because you just haven't brought that language together. But this isn't something that you have to figure out on your own. I think we're a lot closer to it than we think we are, but sometimes it takes a little bit of that outside feedback to package it up just right.
Yeah, my flavor of that is if you're struggling with like imposter syndrome or thinking through all of these things, is to have someone else write your speaker bio or your podcast description, whatever bio, whatever that looks like to you. Yeah. Have someone else write it for you, because unintentionally I did this early on when I started. Somebody wrote their own bio for me when they had me on their podcast, and I read it and I was like, I never would have said that about myself. Yeah. And like, I really appreciate that you wrote this, because now I'm going to adopt some of this and like own it moving forward. And so similar thing, just getting that outside perspective to see what other people see in you can be a really powerful tool.
Yeah. I love that. It's a great literal exercise we can do. And when is it not helpful to get a second set of eyes on something? You know, I think we'll move into self-employment and entrepreneurship, but there is definitely benefit to having extra eyes and extra voices involved in helping us. You know, these are sticking points for a lot of us. These are, you know, none of the women, and I'll say this with a couple exceptions. Sometimes I have a conversation like this with a woman and she's like, you know what? I feel so much better. I just needed to get it off my chest. I just need to say out loud that I'm having these feelings, but the truth is I'm the breadwinner in my family. I got a lot of expectations. I've got all the hats that we wear as women, and they're different for each of us, but I'm going to put my head down and I'm going to sit tight. But it also can be the beginning of a really beautiful journey of all sorts of discovery. And so it may start with our career, or maybe it starts, in my case, I went through a divorce in my early 30s. And that was kind of the tipping point for me. It led to reestablishing myself as a woman in my 30s, and then taking a different look at my career and saying, wait a second, does this make sense based on this life that I'm living today? And it didn't. So I started to make some shifts professionally as a result. And so all those pieces are different for each of us, and the order of them is different, but you can't it's really hard to stop once you start. I'll just say that. Once you open that
Once you've
Pandora's
opened
box, yeah.
it.
And you can always tell when somebody's done the work. You can always tell when they've opened themselves up to the deeper knowing. You can always tell that they're on that journey.
So for people that maybe go through this process
Mhm.
and they come up with the answer of trying to find a new direction in the corporate world isn't the right fit for me, that's not enough.
Yeah.
What suggestions do you have for people as they are making their way towards entrepreneurship or finding an alternative beyond the corporate world?
This is a 12-hour podcast, right? Like a master class? Because I wanna know what you would say about this as well. Well, I'll say just a couple things that come to mind, right away is everybody on the outside makes it look easy, and it's not. And so whatever vision or ideal or, um, highlight reel you're seeing about successful entrepreneurship, ignore it because your journey is your own, the path you're on is your own, your solution is your own, and you can shortcut some things, but there are many lessons. I don't want to say that we have to learn the hard way, but that there is so much value in learning through doing. And there's a lot of noise out there. And so the other piece of that is be really protective again of those inputs. So while you're doing this self discovery, you want to know what other people think of you. When you're choosing this path or you've already chosen this path, maybe hanging out with your old colleagues who have steady corporate W-2 9 to 5s may not be the best energy source for you right now because you might be looking at 6 months of no paycheck based on the kind of business that you're building and what that can do to your confidence, not just in yourself, but your ability to pull this off in the long run. It can do some damage. And so just being really thoughtful about the information that you're taking in. Um, and then, last piece, and this is deeply personal, and I'm going to make a bit of a generalization here, but it was true for me, and I think it's true for a lot of women that I talk to who are thinking about dipping their toe in entrepreneurship. If you've played the corporate game, and this comes down to money, and I think a lot of us are living in that scarcity energy that I have to be able to make what I made in the corporate world in the first 60 days. And if I can't do that, then it's not going to work. And the truth is, a lot of us have longer runways than we think. It's really important to set boundaries for yourself. Like, these are the things I will and will not do in order to fund this venture. But it doesn't always happen on the timeline that you lay out in your business plan if you write one. And I will say 7 years later, having had periods where I've made no money, periods where I've made more money than I made in the corporate space, it's not the easy, predictable path, but it's possible. And so hanging in there during those maybe down times or those times when you're questioning it all, I can't say is right for everybody, but there for every peak there's a valley and vice versa. And I think that's the spirit of entrepreneurship, and you have to be able to roll with that in order to create a sustainable business like this, because it is a wild ride. And I have 7,000 more things I could say, but I'll pause there, and I want to hear what you think.
I mean, I agree. There's the idea that everyone makes it look easy is 100% the truth. And there are days where it feels really easy. And there's days where it feels like everything is clicking and you think to yourself like, "Oh gosh, I'm so glad that I've made this choice and this is the direction that I'm going down." And then just like every other job, there are days where you're like, "Oh man, this sucks and I don't
Yeah.
love this." And part of the blessing and the curse that comes with going down this path of like building your own business, and James and I have this conversation all the time because we run our business together. It's like the best part is that you get to be in control of every decision that's made and the direction that you go. And the worst part is that you are responsible for every decision and every direction that you take. And so sometimes when a bad thing is happening in the business or you made the wrong choice or you're in one of those valleys, it's a deeper valley than it would have been if you were in the corporate world where there was a team that held ownership of it. or somebody else that even metaphorically you could point the finger at and say that it was their fault and now you have to deal with it. It all falls on you. And so that's probably like, again, like the best and the worst part there. That peak and valley mindset is so important to keep in mind when you're going down that path. But to your point, there's a lot of beauty that comes from it and a lot of things that can take shape for you in your life, and you have the opportunity to do what feels right and build that career that gives you maybe fulfillment that you haven't been able to find other places. But again, it's not for the faint of heart, that's for certain.
No, and I love the layers that you added to that, and it is deeply personal, and each of our situations is different, and our motivations for choosing this are different. I left my last corporate role and very uncharacteristically quit that job without a plan, and took about a year to come back around and start doing the consulting work that I'm doing now. But there's a lot of people that can't make that choice. And so there is that pressure to figure it out and to figure it out more quickly, or you're the one that carries the health insurance. And so therefore, if you leave corporate America, you leave the health insurance behind. And all of a sudden, that is very real. And it's the number one, when women reach out to me quietly and they're curious about doing their own thing, it's always the health insurance that has them.
When I quit my job and joined James, that was the number one question that we got from everybody.
Yep.
And thankfully, we have a really supportive community around us that we're all really excited. There weren't like people that were naysaying or warning against it. But everybody was like, what are you doing for health insurance? We're like, well, there is a marketplace.
Yeah.
Like we found that option, and talking through that with people. But it's funny how something like that can be this universal, like unspoken barrier for making a choice that feels right for you.
Yeah. Well, we give it a lot of power. I know for me, I had a spreadsheet because I have a spreadsheet for everything, but it was all sorts of tabs as I was ramping up to do this and thinking about what gets in the way. And that literally was the title of this one tab, and health insurance was on there. And I developed just enough of that self-trust to not let it be a roadblock, but to let it just be a speed bump. Okay, I work in insurance. I don't do health insurance, but like I could call somebody. I'm sure I know somebody that could help me see, is buying my own health insurance going to be $500 a month, or is it going to be $5,000? I literally had no idea. I'd never bought my own insurance before. And so you make that call, you get more information, and all of a sudden it doesn't carry as much weight as it used to. And so there are any number of those things that pop up in the course of daydreaming and then starting to make plans and actually launch a business. But yet to this day, I haven't found anything that hasn't been able to be overcome, whether it's because I learned a new skill, or I reached out to my network, or I asked for help. There's, to your point, people are not rooting for our failure. There are days when I wonder, just based on my own negative self-talk, but like in general, people want to see me succeed and to see you succeed, and even to be part of that success. And so there are days when I pick up the phone and I feel like, oh, it's been too long since I touched base with this person, and now it's getting awkward and the connection is a little moldy, and is it appropriate that I reach out? And 100% of the time they take my call, and 100% of the time they want to know how they can support me. And so that's all good credibility that we build many cases in the corporate space. We've built those champions and those cheerleaders for us already. And now is the time to call on them. And that is a skill. Like that is a whole other skill, but it's an inside job, I think, doing this work and having the gumption to stay with it in the hard times. And like you said, to really celebrate. I say this all the time, and I'll try to get through it and not be emotional or not get emotional, but I didn't, when I was a little girl, I didn't dream about a career in insurance. As I got older, I think I dreamt a little bit about corner offices and C-suites and expense accounts. And this that I'm doing, never dreamt this big. And it's not because I have a multi-billion-dollar company and a team of 80 people. It's because I get to get up and work on my terms every day. I get to choose the people that I work with. I get to talk about the things that I care about. And little Meg, 25 years ago, starting out in insurance, didn't see the path. I did not see how that could be possible. And it wasn't possible 25 years ago, but it is today. And I think it is for a lot of us who are sitting on big ideas. Come join us. Like, there is enough to go around. There is overlap in some cases, but there is so much room for new ideas and new voices, but new energy and new personalities. And it's a really cool time to be in the industry, frankly, and to be doing what you and I are doing and working here, but in a very different capacity. So
I think that's a perfect way, even though we could go on for hours. I love that message as the final send off for anybody that joined us for the discussion. But thank you, Meg, so much for joining me, and for everybody for watching. If you're not already, make sure you get connected with Meg and follow along on her content and her journey. And thank you again for joining me, and have a wonderful day, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Leading Change. If you like what you saw, be sure to come back on a weekly basis and subscribe for more expert interviews focused on digital transformation, change management, and emerging technologies.